At 4:12 a.m., the Capitol looked exactly the way it was meant to look at that hour. Empty avenues, silent federal buildings, traffic lights cycling through green and red for no one. A city designed to project order even in darkness. The kind of calm that convinces people nothing important happens before sunrise. That belief was wrong. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no emergency alerts pushed to phones. Along service roads, underground garages, and delivery corridors built for night maintenance, unmarked vehicles rolled into position and went dark. Doors opened quietly, radios stayed silent. FBI and CE teams moved in mixed formations, deliberately integrated so no single unit could see the entire operation unfolding across the district. This wasn't a raid, it was a shutdown. At the same minute, identical movements were happening across multiple locations tied together by paperwork rather than proximity. Office buildings with no signage, private storage facilities registered as archival contractors, logistics spaces that had passed inspections for years because nothing about them ever appeared urgent. These weren't criminal hideouts, they were infrastructure. The first access point didn't require force. A loading entrance accepted a valid credential, no alarms, no hesitation. The system recognized them. That detail mattered. Inside, the air felt wrong. Not stale, not dusty, filtered, regulated. The kind of environment maintained by machines that never sleep. Lights came on in sections, not all at once, revealing a space that looked ordinary only at a glance. Clean floors, pallets aligned with industrial precision, clipboards hanging where inspectors expected them to be. Too precise. Within minutes, agents understood they weren't inside a warehouse meant to store things. They were inside a place designed to move them. Packaging lanes ran in parallel, separated by function. Materials staged not for assembly, but for turnover. Everything pointed forward, toward exits aligned with delivery schedules that blended seamlessly into Washington's early morning traffic patterns. Nothing sat idle. Nothing looked temporary. Then came the pills. Long, stainless tables held press molds calibrated to pharmaceutical tolerances. Trays stacked floor to ceiling carried tablets identical in size, color, and imprint to legitimate prescription medication. Already sealed, already boxed, already labeled. Millions of units prepared for departure, not production. This wasn't ramping up. This was distribution. Further inside, reinforced containers sat under shipping codes tied to routine government-adjacent vendors. When one was opened, the scale erased any remaining doubt. Dense bricks of narcotics packaged like commercial freight. Nearby, smaller sealed units triggered immediate protocol changes. Fentanyl, pure enough that every movement slowed. Masks stayed sealed. Gloves were checked again. In spaces like this, speed doesn't save lives. Precision does. Surveillance cameras covered every angle, but they didn't look out of place. They matched standard security systems used across the district. From the outside, there was nothing to question. No broken fences, no suspicious activity. This facility had survived because it never asked to be ignored. It looked exactly like it belonged. That was the design. As initial counts came back, even veteran agents stopped estimating. The numbers were too large. Thousands of pounds of narcotics, millions of pills, enough volume to supply entire regions without interruption. This wasn't feeding Washington. It was feeding the country. And that was the moment the tone shifted. Not because of resistance, there was none, but because of realization. A network like this doesn't exist through chaos or intimidation. It exists because someone understood systems well enough to live inside them without triggering alarms. By the time the outer perimeter was fully secured, the operation had already moved past shock and into method. Because whatever had been uncovered here wasn't the end of something. It was the surface of something far larger, still moving, still active, and about to realize that, for the first time, the Capitol itself had stopped playing along. By the time the first facility was locked down, the rest of the city was already reacting, not outwardly, internally. At 4:38 a.m., systems most people never see began to hesitate. Shipping dashboards paused between refresh cycles. Delivery confirmations queued without clearing. Access logs recorded successful entries, but no exits. To anyone outside the machinery, nothing looked wrong. To analysts watching from inside Federal Command, it looked like a system losing sync. That delay was intentional. This phase wasn't about seizures, it was about behavior. FBI and ICE analysts weren't tracking vehicles yet. They were tracking assumptions. A network built on efficiency reveals itself when efficiency is disrupted. And this one had a rhythm that was suddenly breaking. By 4:51, secondary nodes began adjusting. Routes that normally ran straight through the district bent slightly outward. Trucks diverted before reaching scheduled handoff points. Warehouses marked as inactive showed brief spikes in internal movement. Lights on, systems accessed, then silence again. No panic, no shutdowns, just repositioning. That told investigators everything. This wasn't a nervous operation reacting to enforcement. It was a mature system redistributing load the way it had been designed to do. Across Washington, parallel actions were already underway. In a private office tower 2 miles away, agents entered a suite registered to a compliance consulting firm with multiple federal contracts. No drugs, no cash, just servers. Racks of them, humming quietly behind drywall. The kind of infrastructure no one questions when it's labeled oversight. The drives were warm. That mattered. Cyber teams moved carefully. Not because data might be wiped, but because it wouldn't be. Systems like this don't panic delete. They log, they archive, they adapt. When the first dashboards resolved, the room went quiet. This wasn't inventory tracking, it was orchestration. A multi-state map pulsed to life, not with fixed routes, but with probabilities. Corridors lit and dimmed based on traffic density, inspection history, and enforcement patterns. If pressure increased on one highway, flow shifted elsewhere minutes before units arrived. Drivers didn't see destinations. They received instructions in segments, one leg at a time. No single stop could expose the whole picture. This wasn't reaction. It was anticipation. Another layer tracked something more unsettling. Regulatory behavior, inspection schedules, audit cycles, staffing shortages. Which offices delayed reviews? Which supervisors postponed escalations? The system didn't fight oversight. It predicted it and moved around it. That was the breakthrough. This network wasn't hiding from the government. It was living inside it. By 5:07, the first interdictions happened far from the original site. Not dramatic stops. Routine inspections that lasted too long. Weight discrepancies that couldn't be explained quickly enough. Trucks pulled aside not because they were flagged, but because their timing broke pattern. Cargo was seized. Routes went dark. And for the first time, the network hesitated. Internal messages recovered later showed the moment clearly. Automated reroutes began overlapping. Backup corridors collided. Redundancy turned into congestion. What had once flowed invisibly began to slow under its own complexity. That was the risk the architects had always worked to avoid. Systems built for efficiency don't fail loudly. They fail when too many variables change at once. By early morning, analysts understood this was no longer a regional case. This was a privately controlled logistics network operating faster and more flexibly than many legal supply chains inside the United States. That realization changed everything. This wasn't just about drugs moving illegally. It was about control of infrastructure. And somewhere outside Washington, the people who had designed this system were seeing the same data, watching routes fail to resolve, and understanding that, for the first time, the machine they trusted might not outrun what was closing in. Because the pressure wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was coming from everywhere at once. By the time the network realized it was losing coherence, there was nowhere left to redirect the pressure. For years, it had survived by never facing everything at once. One inspection here, one delayed audit there. A shipment paused, another rerouted. Losses absorbed quietly, written off as variance. That logic collapsed the moment disruption became simultaneous. At 6:12 a.m., convoy behavior across 3 states shifted in the same 5-minute window. Not dramatically, subtly. Speed changes measured in seconds. Missed handoff windows. Vehicles arriving early to locations that weren't ready to receive them. In systems built on precision, hesitation is visible long before failure is obvious. Federal units stopped watching destinations. They watched corrections. Stops followed behavior, not warrants. On interstate corridors feeding into Washington, inspections appeared where manifests had just been updated. At distribution yards, gates stayed closed a few minutes longer than usual, long enough to trap cargo between permissions. In transfer zones that had never seen enforcement, lights came on unexpectedly and stayed on. The network tried to compensate. It always did. This time, compensation collided with itself. Secondary hubs filled faster than they were designed to. Overflow routes overlapped. Automated rerouting created congestion where there had never been any. What was meant to remain invisible became loud through inefficiency alone. Inside Federal Command, the map changed character. Lines thinned, nodes dimmed. Corridors that had pulsed steadily for years went quiet. Not all at once, but enough to confirm collapse was no longer theoretical. That silence wasn't relief, it was failure. As seizures were logged, the scale stopped being abstract. Millions of counterfeit pills packaged to mimic legitimate pharmaceuticals. Nearly 2,000 pounds of narcotics staged for inland distribution. Cash counted not as profit, but as operating capital that would never circulate again. But the most important confirmation didn't come from weight or value. It came from absence. Dashboards froze mid-cycle. Schedules stopped refreshing. Systems that had updated every 60 seconds for years now sat on old timestamps. The network didn't panic. It didn't self-destruct. It simply ran out of options. At 7:03, federal auditors initiated parallel access requests across agencies tied to logistics oversight. Nothing aggressive, nothing accusatory, just routine pulls, historical approvals, deferred inspections, compliance overrides, individually boring, together devastating. The same entities surfaced again and again. Shell consultancies, third-party auditors, advisory firms embedded between enforcement and execution. Authority wasn't centralized. It was distributed just enough to blur responsibility. That was the design. No one had to give illegal orders. Everyone just had to agree to wait. At 7:41, the first voluntary meetings were requested, not by traffickers, by administrators, mid-level managers, compliance officers, policy analysts whose names never appeared on warrants, but whose signatures controlled timing. They didn't confess, they clarified. One phrase repeated across interviews. We thought this was how it worked. By 8:19, investigators understood this wasn't a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was a model, a structure that treated enforcement as negotiable, outcomes as adjustable, delay as a legitimate tool. Drugs didn't move because laws were broken. They moved because laws were postponed. That realization shifted the operation into its final phase, not escalation, resolution. Because once a system is exposed as dependent on silence, the only way to dismantle it is to remove the silence entirely. And that was about to happen. By mid-morning, the operation stopped expanding, not because there was nothing left to seize, but because the structure itself had finished collapsing. At 9:58 a.m., the final synchronization order went out. Not an arrest sweep, not a raid, a lock. Across Washington and connected corridors, discretionary access was revoked simultaneously. Permits suspended. Compliance authorities frozen. Third-party review powers rescinded without notice. Systems that had relied on layered approvals suddenly had none. The network didn't resist. It couldn't. Its greatest strength, distributed control, became its weakness the moment every layer lost permission at once. By 10:14, financial institutions flagged cascading failures. Accounts tied to logistics consultancies stopped clearing. Contracts auto-renewed for years failed in bulk. Vendors who had never missed a payment suddenly couldn't move funds already approved. Phones lit up. Not with threats, with confusion. By 10:31, federal custody actions began. Not dramatic, not public. Individuals were approached at offices, at homes, at transit hubs. No cuffs in hallways, no media alerts. Just quiet notifications and controlled removals. Most didn't argue. Some nodded. A few asked the same question. Is this everywhere? The answer was yes. At 11:06, the final tally stabilized. 2,000 pounds of narcotics removed from circulation. Pills counted in the millions, indistinguishable from legitimate medication until it was too late. $39 million seized or frozen, not buried, not hidden, but embedded inside systems designed to look clean. That was the revelation. This network hadn't survived by hiding from the system. It survived by becoming part of it. By early afternoon, Washington looked unchanged. Traffic moved, offices reopened, briefings spoke of ongoing reviews and interagency coordination. There were no emergency announcements, no visible shockwaves, but entire layers of authority were gone. Emails dead-ended, decisions stalled. Processes that once resolved themselves quietly now required scrutiny they had never faced before. Inside Federal After Action reports, the conclusion was blunt. This wasn't a cartel problem. It wasn't even a drug problem. It was a systems problem. Criminal networks no longer rely on chaos. They rely on efficiency, on compliance, on patience. They move through the same infrastructure that keeps the country running, counting on the fact that slowing enforcement is easier than stopping crime outright. This operation worked because it didn't chase shipments. It targeted timing. It didn't expose secrets. It removed permission. When it ended, the highways stayed open. The warehouses still stood. The economy kept moving. But something underneath it was gone, and the final assessment, circulated quietly and never meant for headlines, said it plainly. When criminal power learns to move faster than oversight, force alone isn't enough. The real battle is whether the systems we trust can still tell the difference between what belongs there and what has been using them all along.